Professor Adil, so in light of the coronavirus pandemic, researchers are now focusing on better understanding the uncertainty around strong global natural shocks. So how can we draw on the recent evidence and uncertainty to address global climate change? Can we revive the Paris Agreement with greater commitment and rigor?
Yeah, two things there that you mentioned, both very important. One is this idea of long-term shocks and of things that we keep saying that, do the right thing, otherwise bad things will happen. So despite all the surprise that everyone expresses about the virus, the fact is that experts have been talking about it as incessantly as you and I and others have been talking about climate. Right? And yet
Right.
you and I chose to ignore this pandemic because, well, it may happen. So when someone comes and says something may happen, but I can't tell you when it will happen, exactly what it will look like, exactly where it will start, there is this reluctance to act, right? And that has been the story of the virus, the pandemics, the epidemics. And that is clearly the exact same story on the environment side, not just for climate, but for biodiversity, for water, for ecosystem health, for all sorts of things. And that is what the shadow on Paris is. I, as you might know, have not been a very big fan of the Paris Agreement. Right?
Right.
Even if it were implemented, it doesn't get us where we need to be. It doesn't even get us very close. All it does is it shows intent to get too close. And the Paris Agreement right before this was, I think, nearly dead. And my fear is that this is not going to give new life to Paris. I think we will try. I will try because I still think it's better than not having it. I think people will try to put life into it. People will try to put more energy into it. People will try to make those links. But what is lacking with the Paris Agreement is really, at one level, the regulatory teeth, because it is all so voluntary that it is based on goodwill. And the second is that there isn't really the leadership. I don't see the leadership. Certainly don't see it in the US. I don't see it in Europe. I don't see it in India. I may see some of it in China. I don't see it in most of the rest of the developing world. So
Right.
the challenge also here is going to be that you're going to be in economic conditions where that goodwill, that voluntary intent by whether it is companies or government, will be even more difficult because the fiscal and policy space to do anything would have shrunk so much that everyone will be saying, well, right now I just need to keep afloat. And your climate is something that's going to happen at some unknown time, some unknown place in the future. So unfortunately, I would like to be an optimist, but on this one, I find it difficult.
Right. My last question is, Professor Adil, that if you think social scientists need to take a backseat in all of this, then what's their role in all of this then? Because, and especially economists who tend to think of issues like climate change and pollution at the margin, so they're weighing sort of social costs against benefits. But if you think that it's the role of scientists to take up a larger space in this domain, then how is it that social scientists can carry forward their message and help the scientists in this regard?
So no, I hope I haven't miscommunicated. No, I do not think social scientists need to take a back seat. In fact, it's the exact opposite. I think this is the time to stand and be counted, to stand and be heard. This is the time to really push. What I'm afraid of is that social scientists will be made to take a backseat. That the argument might come from policy that right now we need to do the immediate. That's what emergencies do. What emergencies do is you say, well, I know there are all these important things, but right now I need to do what is immediately important.
Right.
And my fear is that the really important aspects of what you're calling social science could become sort of drowned in that. I think if you listen to the science people, they understand this. The science folks understand the importance of interdisciplinary. The science folks understand the interconnectedness, as do the social science folks. It's the policy people that I'm worried about, who might say, yes, I do understand everything about equity, and I do understand that issues about environmental justice, but right now we have an emergency to deal with. That's what I'm afraid of. So I think what we need to do as scholars, whether it is science, whether it is social science, right now, I think, in some ways, I think right now is another time to bring down these disciplinary walls, which I've never liked, which we have mostly self-constructed also. Right now, you have an integrated problem, meaning the virus, which has demonstrated the need for multiple disciplines to come together. Just as we have been saying, the important thing about climate is it's not a discipline, it's a problem area. It requires multiple disciplines to come together. So I think sort of this tribalism of scholarship, which I have never been a fan of, which I think has been one of the bad ideas of our times, needs to end, and looking at these systemic interrelated problems. Because what is the virus teaching us? The virus is teaching us that very quickly the medical problem becomes an economic problem. It
Right.
is teaching us that, yeah, even as it starts, the pathogen becomes a problem of justice. Right? Now, we knew this. We knew this with earthquakes. When earthquakes happen, the earthquake doesn't sort of say, I'm going to hurt the poor person more, but the poor person does get hurt more, because the poor person is forced to live in a place that is more unsafe. The same is true for climate. The same is true on the questions of gender. So we are finding that in all aspects, whatever the fault lines of inequity and injustice were, become more compounded in crisis. And that, I think, is the reason. So my fear is that disciplines, when they get the pushback from policy, might go into a cocoon and try to defend their disciplines, as opposed to holding hands and saying, this is the time, as in many others, that we have to think across these things. The world is not divided between anthropologists and sociologists and economists and physicists. That is
Right.
not how the human race evolved. The world has problems, and those problems
Yeah.
require disciplines to come together.
Okay. Wonderful, Professor Adil. Thank you so much.